Thank you for this interview. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit more for our public and viewers to know more about who you are, and also talking a tiny bit about your book before going to your question.
So my name's Magid. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. I used to be a journalist based in Amman in 2015 and 2016, very interested in Jordanian politics. I returned to the United States, but continued writing about the Hashemite kingdom. In 2022, when I started working on this book, I noticed that King Abdullah had been in power for over 2 decades, but not a single comprehensive biography written about him. So there was a gap in the literature, and I thought a book solely focused on him and not his father, King Hussein, would be interesting for readers.
Thank you for your presentation. So regarding the ongoing situation in the Middle East, it was for us necessary to interview you on Jordan and mainly about King Abdullah II. But of course, whenever we're going to talk about the king, we're going to link it to what is happening in Jordan and today, and even a tiny bit in the past, and understanding more the link between the US and Jordan. And so for that, we have worked on some questions. We have read some part of your books. We have listened to your podcast as well on the books. So my colleague will start asking you the first question.
So you chose to write a book about the King Abdullah, and you just said that there was like a lack of literature on this topic. Were there any things that surprised you about Abdullah II, that like as a person or even as a political actor? And also, what were your sources when you did all this research about this topic, considering that there was no literature about that?
Sure. So I guess what most surprised me was just the very strong personal relationship he has with the United States, and which is why I chose the title, The Most American King Abdullah of Jordan. The fact that he went to middle school and high school in the United States. He was on the wrestling team at Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts and went by the name Ab, not Abdullah, because he wanted to fit in with the other guys. The fact that afterwards he went to Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. and so much enjoyed that experience. He sent his own children to the prestigious Jesuit college. He trained with the U.S. military in Kentucky and would actually go out partying with other U.S. military members at the time. He was on a Star Trek episode. It shows his love of U.S. culture. Later, he went on his honeymoon in the United States as well with Queen Rania in Hawaii, New York, and Washington. And when he became king, he actually spoke better English than Arabic. And even after he became king, he continued to own property in the United States, both in the Washington, D.C. area and in California. So it's just really unusual to have a Middle Eastern leader or just any leader with such intense ties with another country. If I were to think about it in the United States, if we had a leader who spent middle school and high school in Mexico, spoke better Spanish than English, continued to own property in Mexico after he became leader, this would all be really stunning. It would be probably the main focus of the campaign. So I thought it was quite unusual, and therefore the title was appropriate.
And so when talking more about your title, so you've chosen the Most American King, why does it capture more than other framing? For instance, you've mentioned the US, but he also had strong links with Great Britain. So why more talking about the Americanness of this king?
So as you correctly note, he does have strong relations with Great Britain. He did go to Oxford University, though he didn't graduate. He did serve in the British military, which is quite unusual as well for a leader of an Arab country to serve in a different one's military before he enlisted in the Jordanian military. So the Most American King title doesn't 100% capture his entire life, but I think it goes to the essence. And why I chose the title, it's not just his personal relationship with the United States, it's also political. And he is ensured as leader that the key part of his foreign policy has been excellent relations with the United States. So he was the first Arab leader to meet with President Obama, President Biden, and President Trump in the White House. Thousands of US troops are in Jordan under both Democratic and Republican administrations. The ties between the CIA and Jordan's intelligence services are quite strong. One example would be that after 9/11, the United States sent non-Jordanian detainees to the Hashemite kingdom to interrogate them, according to Human Rights Watch, before moving them to Guantanamo Bay afterwards because of the special relationship. around $1.5 billion in U.S. aid has gone into Jordan on an annual basis in recent years. So while he does have an important relationship with the United Kingdom in terms of his ties with the United States, that's really a pillar of his foreign policy. The United Kingdom doesn't give Jordan nearly as much economic assistance as the United States does, or humanitarian aid, or the military intelligence component. So I thought the title was appropriate because not only King Abdullah's personal relationship with the United States, which is quite strong, but also the political one as well.
So, as you just mentioned, there are also strong political links. Maybe like, was there an evolution in the Jordanian-American relationships, and also were there maybe any major shifts that you noticed in those over the 2 decades that Abdullah is now king of Jordan?
So I would say the major shift wasn't in the 25 years plus that King Abdullah's rule, but I would say in between Jordan before King Abdullah and Jordan after King Abdullah. So one example would be during the 1990-1991 Gulf War, when the U.S. launched its invasion into Iraq, along with many of its other Western allies. King Hussein at the time was very close to Saddam Hussein. He visited Iraq over 60 times, actually, in the 1980s. And he strongly opposed the U.S. invasion. And that very much angered President Bush at the time. And that caused the U.S. aid to Jordan to significantly decrease because the Washington didn't appreciate such public criticism of its campaign. And in 2003, when we had another U.S. invasion of Iraq, King Abdullah adopted a very different tactic. He actually worked quietly with the Bush administration at the time, ensured that there were overflight rights from Jordan into Iraq, intelligence gathering missions. U.S. troops were based in Jordan. There were Patriot missiles as well. And all this was done for King Abdullah not to repeat what he viewed as a mistake of his father to cause a rupture in ties with the United States. So King Abdullah as king, even though there have been some challenges with the United States, that would be one example, would be the 2003 invasion. Another would be the U.S. Transfer of the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which Jordan very much opposed during the first Trump administration. But he ensures that even though there are disagreements, they're handled quietly and diplomatically. And one example would be that even after the transfer of the embassy, the U.S. aid to Jordan actually increased because President Trump at the time very much realized and appreciated, along with the U.S. military and the CIA, the important stabilizing role that Jordan has in the region.
Before going back into learning more about the U.S. and Jordan relation, and mainly the U.S. with King Abdullah II, maybe we can talk more about the attempt of reform. You've discussed that in your book, that King Abdullah II tried and attempted many reforms, like for the youth unemployment, the rising economic situation, and so on. So how genuine have this reform project been in your view?
So as you correctly note, King Abdullah has launched multiple political reform efforts to liberalize, or some would argue democratize, the country. One would be after the Arab Spring protests in 2011, 2012, but there was even an earlier round as well under Deputy Prime Minister Moan Muasher in 2005, in the 2005 period. And then after the Prince Hamza sedition affair in 2021, there was another round. But at the end of the day, Jordan, according to the Economist rankings, they rank countries according to their democratic levels, puts Jordan at the lowest one as authoritarian. And we don't really see, despite a lot of talk about democratization, significant progress. King Abdullah, he said in 2011 that Jordan would move from the king selecting the prime minister to parliament having that role, but that vow was never implemented. Parliament remains toothless, and I would say the most significant example would be last year with the 2024 parliamentary elections, where the Islamic Action Front, which is affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, did quite well, and they won the largest group. But then a few months later, they were banned by the government. Their offices were raided, their assets were seized, and Muslim Brotherhood members were then arrested. So it shows that King Abdullah and the Jordanian authorities are not very much influenced by what the people vote for in elections. So I think in the beginning, one could have given King Abdullah and his regime the benefit of the doubt that they were interested in political reform. But after time and time again, where these actions really go nowhere, and we end up basically in the same spot with King Abdullah and the security forces making all the key decisions in the country, I think we can't really argue that King Abdullah is serious about democratization in his country. In fact, it would probably be the other way. And I think the priority right now is not for a liberalization, but it's to ensure a smooth transition for his son, Crown Prince Hussein, to take over. And that's what we see in terms of the Amman's focus.
Thank you. I think we hear like a lot of things about on the news about the region around Jordan, but I think that most of the people don't have like a clue of what is going on inside the country. So could you maybe talk a little more about the main factors that are shaping Jordan's current domestic political situation?
So I would say the number one challenge right now domestically is the economy, and it's really terrible. The unemployment rate is over 20% right now in Jordan, and it's been like that for many years. The unemployment among youth is nearly 50%. And you talk about the poverty rate is also quite high. So there's some severe fiscal challenges, and that really goes against King Abdullah's vision, because when he came into power, he actually used the slogan "Jordan First" over a decade before President Trump used it. And he wanted to contrast himself in a subtle way from his father, King Hussein, who very much focused on the Arab world, on the Middle East, his role in Palestine, his role in Syria, Iraq. But King Abdullah wanted to focus more on internal domestic factors. And the number one was to improve the economy. He did have some successes in the first few years under his economic privatization program, which lowered unemployment from about 20-something% to around 12 to 13%. During the 2008 global recession, Jordan got knocked off its path. And then we saw the Syrian refugee crisis, ISIS, energy challenges with its connection with Egypt, and then the COVID pandemic, and the unemployment rate just kept going up and up and up. So if you talk to Jordanians, the number one issue consistently, even though there's a lot of attention on other wars in the region, certainly what's happening in Gaza, Jordanians will consistently tell you that the economy is the number one matter for them, their priority, and it's really been frustrating because there's been such little progress. In fact, during the previous administration in the United States, there was a phenomenon where Jordanians would be traveling to Mexico to then illegally migrate into the United States to find jobs. Of course, under the Trump administration, that's no longer feasible. But it shows how desperate some Jordanians are to get jobs. Many other Jordanians will travel to the Gulf region. Some will go to Europe. But if you talk to Jordanians, the number one issue is the economy, and King Abdullah has failed to deliver on that end.
Drawing back into what is the main internal challenge, other than the economic one, there's also this politic ones with the Muslim Brotherhoods kind of winning some seats in the parliaments, and also they're kind of tackling a bit more the government. So can you develop a bit more about what is the status of the Muslim Brotherhoods in Jordan today, and also talking more about the state's evolving relationship with this group in question?
So King Abdullah has tensions with the Muslim Brotherhoods for years right now. It goes well before the 2023 Gaza war began. He gave an interview in 2013 with The Atlantic magazine where he called the Muslim Brotherhood a Masonic cult, wolves in sheep's clothing. So there's been a lot of tensions between them. The Muslim Brotherhood during the Arab Spring protests were very active in the demonstrations against the government, which King Abdullah did not appreciate at the time. In 1999, one of King Abdullah's first acts as leader is he expelled senior Hamas officials from Jordan. And of course, you know, Hamas has a very close relationship with the Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood, so that caused an escalation of tensions as well. Most recently, during the 2023 war, the Muslim Brotherhood organized protests against the Jordanian government, specifically on the 1994 peace treaty with Israel, the Gaza Accord, the security cooperation. And the Jordanian government didn't appreciate the Muslim Brotherhood, accusing them of not being sufficiently supportive of the Palestinian cause and of maintaining ties with Israel. So there was frustration with them on that point. And then most recently, even after the Muslim Brotherhood did quite well in the 2024 elections, where they won a plurality, the most seats of any party, according to the Jordanian government, they accused the Muslim Brotherhood of engaging in terrorism, smuggling rockets and drones into the country, to prepare for attacks against targets inside the Hashemite kingdom. And for King Abdullah, he views this as a red line. And then afterwards, he decided to ban the Muslim Brotherhood. So now they are no longer considered a legitimate political actor in the country. It is illegal to associate oneself with them, though the question still remains about the Islamic Action Front, because the Islamic Action Front is technically separate from the Muslim Brotherhood, even though they are affiliated. So we don't know whether the Jordanian government will allow the Islamic Action Front to run in future parliamentary elections. But the Muslim Brotherhood, regardless, will not, under the current dynamics, be able to organize protests against the government's policy on Gaza or their relationship with the United States or the economy like they had been until now.
So going back to the diplomatic field, as you mentioned, like Jordan is a very close ally of the US, and the US provides like around $1.5 billion of yearly aid in development and military aid. And of course, like such an aid is a certain power that a country has on another one. So could you maybe explain to what extent this military and financial assistance of the US to Jordan constrains or empowers Jordan's domestic and regional policy?
Sure. So there's no doubt that the United States is Jordan's main ally, and that he do have a lot of influence over Jordan. One example would be in the 2024-2025 Iran-Israel tensions. The United States had troops in Jordan, and they worked with the Jordanian military to shoot down the Iranian missiles and drones that were fired on 3 separate occasions during the past year and a half. It would have been pretty unlikely for the Jordan and King Abdullah to refuse Washington's offer because of the aid dependency. We saw that also in recent history as well. In 2014 and 2015, the United States launched an anti-ISIS campaign, and they were looking for Arab partners to join with them, not only to provide additional military support, but also to provide more of a political cover, so it wouldn't be seen as a repeat of the 2003 US invasion of Iraq, which had more imperialistic overtones. Jordan, once again, did join that effort, even though there were a significant number of Jordanians who opposed that, including the Muslim Brotherhood at the time. They said, why are we getting involved in a foreign operation against another Arab group across our border? We already spoke about the US cooperation with Jordan in 2003, ahead of the US invasion of Iraq. So time and time again, Jordan has worked with the United States, even though these are policies that are potentially unpopular in the country. And a lot of that is due to the ongoing military and financial support that Washington gives Amman. So I would say there are certain limits. It's not like every single thing the United States asks for, Jordan is going to say yes. And one example would be in February 2025, when King Abdullah visited Washington. He was the first Arab leader, as I noted, to meet with President Trump. And President Trump at the time was calling for Jordan to accept hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from Gaza into the country in part of his quote-unquote Riviera plan. Now, King Abdullah rejected it, but he did it in a more sophisticated way than, for example, Ukrainian President Zelensky, who also came to Washington at the time and also disagreed with US policy. Ukrainian President Zelensky got in a shouting match with President Trump and Vice President Vance, and that led him to being kicked out of the White House in a really spectacular fashion. King Abdullah came to Washington. He disagreed with President Trump, but he called him a man of peace. He praised him publicly, and he voiced criticism of his policies in a private discussion, and that led to, and if anything, praise from President Trump to King Abdullah. So there have been times where they've disagreed, but I would even note on that matter about the transfer of Gazans from the enclave to the Hashemite kingdom, it's not like there were other Arab countries, whether Egypt, whether Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, who are saying, no, we want to accept Gazans, hundreds of thousands or even 1 million plus Gazans into our country. So King Abdullah, why I still think the title Most American King is appropriate, is because there is no other Arab leader on that issue or many others who are outflanking King Abdullah and adopting a more pro-America position as him. So King Washington does have significant influence over Jordan, but as I noted, it's not absolute.
So you've mentioned the U.S. influence on Jordan, and also the conflict that did emerge between some Jordan and the U.S. regarding the question of Palestine. So can we talk a bit more about Trump's approach to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that affected Jordan's internal stability? When we talk about this, it's more demographically speaking. There is more Palestinian Jordanians than Jordanians in Jordan. And so when Trump decided to force the displacement of Palestinians from Gaza to Jordan, it kind of had an impact on the Jordanian population. And there was some beginning of protests against the kings that did not directly answer to Trump's demands. And so can you talk more about this? Can you talk more about this little dispute between Jordan and the US? And does this situation has impacted the relationship between Trump and King Abdullah II? Because Trump did mention the fact that, in a sense, Jordan has no choice but to accept because we found them yearly. So can you please develop a bit more about this characteristic of the situationship?
So as you noted, Jordan's demographics are quite unique in the region. It has the largest number of Palestinians outside of the West Bank and Gaza. According to media reports, it's approximately 50% of the population is Jordanians of Palestinian background, which is much higher than many of the other Gulf countries, or even Egypt or Lebanon. So there is that special element of the population that Jordan has, and which we saw in 1970, which is Jordan's civil war, also known as Black September. That was a conflict between Palestinian militants and the Jordanian state. At the time, Palestinian militants were operating independently in the country, having their own bases, even taxing residents. And King Hussein at the time needed to reassert his country's sovereignty over its entire territory. So that led to really intense clashes between the Palestinian militants and Jordanian authorities. Thousands were killed. So King Abdullah, when he came into power in 1999, he wanted to avoid a repeat of those clashes at any cost. And for him to accept hundreds of thousands of additional Palestinian refugees, including potentially Hamas militants, could have led to a repeat clash. So he wanted to ensure that that would not happen. And for him, that's why it was a red line. And he actually had a lot of support in that matter from the Jordanian population, both from Jordanians of Palestinian background and Jordanians from East Bank descent. So Jordanians from Palestinian background did not want King Abdullah to be a part to a proposal that would really empty Gaza's population and betray the Palestinian cause. And Jordanians of East Bank background opposed it because they didn't want the demographics of the country to shift further against their side and for their political power to be weakened. So he really had almost universal support for his proposal. And that's why when he returned to the country after his visit, when he basically said no to President Trump, there were large rallies in the country to back him and cheer him on. Because this is really widespread support, even though throughout his reign, there have been a lot of criticism of him, both from Jordanians and from the Arab world at large. On this issue, there was universal support.
So we will ask you the last two questions of this interview. So I'll let the floor to my colleague.
Yeah, so we just saw that, of course, Jordan is very directly impacted by the war in Gaza and by the Israeli-Palestinian question due to geography, due to the demographic situation in Jordan, and also due to the US relations that King Abdullah has. But could you maybe talk a bit about the potential scenarios that we can attend from this war in Gaza, possible solutions that are talked of, and that how they would affect Jordan, and what would maybe be the best solution for Jordanians and also for King Abdullah?
So King Abdullah's preferred outcome for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the classic two-state solution. In his memoir, he actually notes a 57-state solution, meaning that if Israel were to withdraw from the West Bank and Gaza and East Jerusalem and reach some sort of agreement on the refugee issue, then that would allow Israel to maintain ties with every single Muslim country around the world. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem feasible right now, but that seems to be the solution from the Jordanian government that's been really consistent from King Abdullah's entire tenure since 1999, as he supports the classic two-state solution. That's been a real priority for him in foreign policy, even though when he meets with leaders from very far away, like in Pakistan or Vietnam or Kazakhstan, he's always mentioning the Palestinian issue, always mentioning the two-state solution. We already noted earlier in our conversation the real tensions he's had with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood. So Jordan does not have nearly as good ties with those Islamist groups in Gaza, in contrast to what we might see in Qatar or Turkey. So he doesn't want to see Hamas being empowered in any significant way. He supports more the Palestinian Authority and Fatah. King Abdullah has frequently met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and he would like someone in his mold to run the Palestinian Authority going forward. So King Abdullah would like the two-state solution to occur, though I don't think many analysts for the time being think that's going to be likely in the time being.
And so for the last question, I'm going to merge some ideas. So we've seen that Jordan is sharing borders with many countries that are facing ongoing changes. We've seen with Syria, with Ahmed al-Shara in power, who was previously a leader of terrorist groups. He was in different groups like Al-Qaeda and then Daesh and now Jabhat al-Nusra, and then now he's HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. We've seen also Iraq going through some turmoil after the elections. We also are seeing what is happening in Lebanon, trying to rebuild a country after years and years of wars, and also the question of disarmament of different militias with Hezbollah, with the Syrian militias, the Iraqi ones. The question is also ongoing. So we've seen that what is happening in the region is also impacting the policies and the politics of King Abdullah II, and as well Jordan in general. So we've talked a lot about the Palestinian situation, but also Israel. Israel is also a key ally for Jordan when it comes to water parts. So we've seen that if Jordan opposed to Israel, it kind of impact its water resources and development. So from all of this development that is ongoing on the MENA region, what could be the best position for King Abdullah to make sure that it is not going to impact his country, socially speaking, economically speaking, and also politically speaking? And the last question will be, what do you want people to know more and understand the key points of your books? What is the message that you're trying to share to people about the king, the most American king in the region?
So in terms of Syria, I think for the Jordanian government and King Abdullah personally, there have been positive developments in the past year. There were a lot of tensions between King Abdullah and President Assad. In fact, in 2011, King Abdullah was the first Arab leader to call for Syrian President Assad to resign because he blamed him for too much bloodshed in the region, and he did not support the way he responded to the Arab Spring protests. Afterwards, there were continuous disagreements between the two parties. Jordan actually hosted a military operations center in 2012 and 2013, along with the United States and Saudi Arabia, which was funding and arming the Syrian opposition. So certainly Assad did not appreciate that. And then there were a lot of disagreements over weapons and drug smuggling into the country during the Assad era. And Jordan even launched airstrikes in 2024 before Assad fell into southern Syria to try to quash the drug smuggling. And they accused the Syrian regime of actively participating in that. So that caused a lot of tensions. When Syrian President Bashar al-Assad fell, King Abdullah moved to really strengthen ties with Damascus and with HTS and Ahmed al-Shara. We saw about 150,000 Syrian refugees who are living in Jordan return to their country. In the Hashemite kingdom, whose resources were considerably strained by the refugee crisis since 2011. That was a positive development. And Syrian authorities promised to work much more constructively with the Jordanian government on the issue of drug and weapon smuggling. So there's definitely been positive developments for Jordan across its northern border with Syria. In terms of the conflict with Israel, it's really been a delicate balancing act for Jordan since the 2023 Gaza war broke out. So on the one hand, Jordan has taken considerable measures to signal its opposition to Israel's military actions in Gaza. Jordan recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv. At the beginning of the conflict, it told Israel's ambassador in Amman not to return until the war ended, and none of those high-level diplomats have returned to their posts even 2 years later. We saw Jordan freeze a very significant water for energy deal with Israel and the UAE. And recently, King Abdullah has even called Israel's military actions in Gaza a genocide. So King Abdullah has been able to show that he strongly opposes Israel's actions, but at the same time, he's ensured that some of the relations have continued in order to maintain the very strong U.S. congressional aid that has been critical for his country. So some examples be his refusal, in contrast to what the protesters demanding, to annul the 1994 peace treaty. He rejects protesters' demands to annul the $15 billion gas accord, which is just as important for Jordan as the water issue is. And most recently, we saw Jordanian security forces, according to an Axios report, serve as a mediator between Israel and HTS, because Jordanian security forces had very close ties with both parties. So it's a tightrope that King Abdullah is walking on this matter, but he needs to appeal to both his domestic population and U.S. lawmakers to continue his leadership on this issue. So I would say with the Gaza war ending, this is another positive development for King Abdullah, like what we saw in Syria. And with the war ending, we're likely to see reduced protests in his country, criticizing the government's stance on the matter, and also a reduction of Iranian proxy attacks into the country. It wasn't just the Iranian missiles and drones that were fired on 3 separate occasions, but there were also Iran-backed militias in Iraq that launched attacks in Jordan in 2024 that killed 3 US soldiers, and that very much embarrassed the regime as well. So these are all positive developments for the country, and why I think even though there are a lot of tensions across the region, I don't see any short-term major threats to King Abdullah's reign. There have been a lot of articles, whether in the Arab Spring protests, whether after the US invasion of Iraq in 2003, or during the 2023-2025 Gaza war, that said that they argued that it was an existential threat to the country. And one of the main messages of the book is to show that King Abdullah's power is much more significant than many realize or many project upon him. In fact, he's now the longest serving Arab leader since he took power in 1999. So many of his neighboring Arab monarchs or Arab leaders have fallen. So we look at Saddam Hussein to Jordan's east. We look at Bashar al-Assad to Jordan's north, Hosni Mubarak to Jordan's south. We look at Gaddafi. We can go on and on of all the Arab leaders who have fallen, and he has remained. And one of the key reasons for that is because of the strong support he has within Jordan's security forces. We don't have a situation like we did in Syria, where there's parts of Jordanian territory that are autonomous, that Jordanian security forces don't have control over, and that ensures that King Abdullah is able to maintain power. King Abdullah himself served in the military for over a decade, so he has very strong relations with the military. And when there have been challenges, the military and the intelligence services have always sided with King Abdullah, not with the opposition. So in 2021, when Prince Hamza launched his sedition affair, it was the army chief who actually went to Prince Hamza's home to tell him that he's now under house arrest, even though that Prince Hamza had some popularity among the Jordanian public. The security forces sided with King Abdullah. In 2023, 2024, there were large protests against the regime about Gaza. And at the same time, the security forces arrested over 1,500 protesters, according to Amnesty International. And that just shows that once again, even though there are many individuals in the country who supported the Palestinian cause, supported the protesters, the military and the security forces and the police are very much on the side of King Abdullah. So he really has staunch support from the security forces. That's another reason why he's been able to maintain power for so long. I would say another one is the fact that he's a monarchy. If you look in the Arab Spring protests, so many of the leaders who have fallen were presidencies, but the monarchies, whether him or in Morocco or in Saudi Arabia or even in Bahrain, they all did much better. So there's something about a monarchy which provides a certain level of legitimacy that the presidencies don't have. I would say also his restrained use of military force has also benefited him, and ensured that he hasn't antagonized other leaders across the region to ensure his power has remained. So we've seen time and time again, King Abdullah, unlike his father who launched the 1967 war with Israel and then lost control over the West Bank and East Jerusalem, King Abdullah has refused to send ground troops overseas, and that has ensured his power. Most recently, we saw there's been a lot of push for Arab countries to send their forces into Gaza to be some sort of international security force, perhaps to disarm Hamas militants. And King Abdullah clearly said that that was not an option for his country because he knew that would be very unpopular, whether that would be Jordanian soldiers killing Palestinians in the tunnels of Gaza or Hamas militants killing Jordanian troops. So he said no, and that's been consistent with his entire reign in terms of more of a Jordan first military approach. And then finally, even though Jordanian domestic politics is more authoritarian, it's more of a nuanced form of quashing dissent, unlike what we see with Iraq under Saddam Hussein or Syria under Bashar al-Assad. He's not bombing hospitals, he's not killing journalists, even though Parliament remained toothless and he's the one with making all the key decisions. And because he's acting in a more nuanced fashion, that is ensuring that the opposition to his rule is lower and much less violent than we see in other countries in the Arab world. So these are some of the main reasons in the book and some of the messages of how King Abdullah has remained in power for so long. But I would say at the same time, one of the messages of the book is also that he has a positive legacy in terms of bringing stability to his country, but there's a lot of criticisms over two other issues. One is what we've discussed in depth, the political repression, the fact that he promised democratization and he has not followed through in any significant manner. And then number two, most importantly for the Jordanian public, is his failure to improve the economy, the high unemployment rate, the significant debt that the Jordanian government has, and the fact that for so many Jordanians, they don't see any economic future for their children or for themselves either. So his legacy is mixed, but I think in general, Jordan is not nearly as covered as it should be. Just for some of your listeners in America, we have the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. None of them have full-time correspondents in Amman. It shows even though Jordan is such an important partner, not only to France, to the United Kingdom, but also to the United States, unfortunately, violence equals headlines. And because Jordan is so safe, it doesn't get nearly as much attention as it should in the West. And I hope that this book provides an opening, especially for readers in France, to get a deeper understanding of the Hashemite kingdom and King Abdullah's unique role.
Yeah, I do hope the same. It's true that Jordan is not the country that is the most talked about. Whenever we talk about Jordan, we tend to link it to Palestine if we need to talk about this aspect of Jordan. I agree that Europe and also the US should probably have a much more focus on Jordan. We've seen that the US today tends to have much more focus on Iraq with the special correspondent there. We ask ourselves many questions about why the US did send him, because when the US sends someone into a country, it means that something bad is happening or the country is in a bad situation. So I agree that maybe we should send some more special, maybe correspondent for journalism or governments to show that some countries also in the region are in a good shape. And so I really hope that this book is going to highlight that to everyone that wants to read and know more about King Abdullah and as well the kingdom. And I thank you very much for your time. I don't know if you have some question, Eloise, or if you want to add something.
No, I think everything is clear. I just wanted to say that, like, what you said about King Abdullah's domestic policies, that they are, like, there's some kind of repression, but not that as violent as in other countries. It's also applicable on the international diplomatic field, because there are many things going wrong in Jordan, and there's also, like, Jordan has a very important role, but it's not just as dramatic as other countries. That's why it's not figured that much in the media, which is very unfortunate, because, as you said, like, Jordan has a very important strategic role in the region and did carry a lot of important policies and is a stabilizing factor in the region. So we should definitely pay more attention to the country.
And so your book, if I remember well, it's available on Amazon. So it's accessible for Europeans. Is it available also elsewhere? That way we can also put some highlight into it and some ads. You can just share where we can buy it, and we can share also the link of it on our YouTube channel. That way people can try and buy your book if they're also very interested into Jordan.
So as you mentioned, it's not only available on Amazon, it's also available via Kindle. If you want to get an ebook, you can as well with Google Play. And then also with my publisher's website, Universal Publishers. So thank you very much. I really appreciate the insightful questions, and I look forward to continuing our conversations about the Hashemite kingdom.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, have a nice day. Bye.
Thank you.